All right, we'll go ahead and get rolling then. So again, welcome everybody to today's webinar. This is part one of our cloud webinar series. And today we're kind of talking day zero, as well as misconceptions and myths about the cloud. And I'm sure everybody has a different definition. Everybody has heard cloud and probably defines it a little bit different. So hopefully today you'll walk away with a little bit better understanding and maybe some ideas about how you can start your own cloud journey, or maybe right the ship on one that you're already on. So my name is Jeff Garrett. I'm the VP of Solutions Architecture here at Opkalla. For those who don't know about Opkalla, maybe new to us, I'll tell you a little bit about what we do. Is we're a trusted advisor in the IT space, and we help our clients really on their IT journeys. We come meet them where they're at and really help them transform what they're doing and with a list of providers and vendors. And we know that not one size fits all. And so we come at this with an agnostic approach of being able to help our customers say exactly where they're at, where they're trying to go, and choose from our 300 plus vendors and providers to help wherever that is. And that's across multiple areas like cloud and cybersecurity and connectivity. Just some of the areas we play in. And obviously today we're talking public cloud, and we have one of those providers with us. And so I'd like to introduce Jim Gehring from Expedient and let him tell you a little bit about himself. Jim.
Great, Jeff. Thank you very much. Excited to be here. My name is Jim Gehring. I am a digital evangelist slash strategist, and probably do both of those roles equally for Expedient with 3+ decades of IT experience under my belt. I certainly enjoy my work. It's a lot of fun. So Expedient's a curator of leading technologies, and that's all aimed at delivering enterprise cloud platforms and multi-cloud services. So ideally, we're going to accelerate our clients' business transformation, simplify their IT operations, and enable the desired business outcomes that they're looking for. We have 14 data centers across the United States, and we run on our own VMware cloud platform that was voted #1 in North America in 2019. So it's a hefty beast. It's not something we put up in the corner of our data centers. It's a true platform. And we run on a redundant network that also has connectivity into the hyperscalers at low latency. So if you're looking for, those systems where you can run your legacy workloads and connect into the new cloud native applications that you're building in the cloud, we have the ideal solution for that. So with our as a service and managed services offerings that bring multi-cloud solutions to the table for you, we offer high value solutions that we believe are truly unique to our industry.
Awesome, Jim. Thank you for being with us today. And I've had a chance to talk with Jim several times in the past and just really brainstorm about this topic, and really excited about what he's going to bring to the conversation today. So again, as we go along, if anybody has any questions, please use Q&A, and we'll try to address those toward the end of today's session. So Jim, where I kind of like to start this conversation is, around kind of defining cloud. I think everyone has such a little bit of a wide spectrum, but at the same time, I feel like some of that's been diluted is a lot of time today, when you say cloud, the first thing that comes to mind is, Azure, AWS, GCP. People kind of think of the big three, and that's not really, it's not really what cloud was intended to be, or cloud computing. And, and I kind of go back to the NIST definition of cloud, where it defines its key characteristics is on-demand self-service, broad network access, resource pooling, rapid elasticity, and measured service. And, really in that, there's no talk about location. And certainly in, the service models of software as a service, platform as a service, and something you're all really familiar with is infrastructure as a service. Again, no concept of location. So, I'm interested in, your thoughts, how you've seen customers tackle this, where you've had to, and I'm sure in your role and where Expedient plays, you've had to do some education around, these services, where it plays, these areas, and make a customer know that, just the big three are not the only game in town when it comes to cloud and what really is cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. And cloud is such a generic term, and there are so many really good uses for it as far as what it's capable of. It's kind of like managed services. If you ask people what managed services is, ask 120 companies, is the great saying, you'll get 121 answers. But I think the biggest problem is that the way NIST is describing cloud is I would say, computing operating model for the future. It's how your entire platform should be operating. The problem is that we often have a lot of legacy workloads that are truly going to prevent us, if not make it more complex, to take on the hyperscale model or the cloud model, let me put it that way, and have that kind of elasticity and marry it with the older platform. Like, that's the big problem, or lift and shift into it, et cetera. You're not getting all of those things described in NIST simply because you've lifted and shifted legacy workloads into the cloud. So the big thing is to, I think, understand or think about first is that it's a journey. And when I say it takes time, I don't mean that you can't have great breakthroughs right away, because anything that takes too long is not really worth it. But if you look at it as something that you can build over time and achieve those goals that are within NIST along the way and build a foundation for your future, then I think you have a good definition for cloud.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a great point. One of the things as I look through is I think, more and more people are becoming familiar with software as a service. That seems to be a first choice nowadays. And I don't, some people do, and I think others don't really think about that as a part of their cloud. Is that when I use a service like Workday or Monday.com or Office 365, that I'm already into a cloud journey as I step into that. And so SaaS certainly being, I think, front and center for a lot of organizations as they start that into the cloud. And do you see organizations who, in your experience, who get into SaaS but are not really treating SaaS like a part of the enterprise as far as it being part of their enterprise cloud, strategies and securities?
Yeah. No, there's a lot of challenges in using SaaS. I think in the smaller organizations, it can be a little simpler. Certainly things like Office 365, ServiceNow, Salesforce, and other things can take a lot off our plate right away. But when you get into the multi-billion-dollar organizations that have a lot of important audit procedures that have to be taken care of, there are things that must be attended to when you're looking at that software as a service environment. But one thing's for sure, the NIST goals of flexibility and growth, et cetera, and elasticity and agility are often a big part of why so many go to that, because in so many arenas where SaaS is used, there is the kinds of solutions out there that can handle most organizations, giving them the flexibility that they want. It's when you go that next level down where you want innovation inside your organization that's customized for who you are and what you're doing that's unique for your customers. That's when the cloud native applications and that development become very important.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I think another thing I want is, we're talking about defining is, SaaS being something that more and more people are familiar with. I think infrastructure as a service, although I think infrastructure as a service became a little cloudy. Well, cloudy is probably not the right term to use. A little grayish, just because I'm a little fuzzy for people, just because so many hardware vendors began to try to use infrastructure as a service for what they were traditionally doing on-prem, just for the marketing aspect, and it really wasn't infrastructure as a service. And to tag on to that, platform as a service, I think there's a blurred line as you start thinking about what is platform as a service versus what is infrastructure as a service. And some of the Azure and AWS services kind of blur that line. And when you're talking about using some of those native services. So I just, any thoughts around, where you see true, maybe how you would think about true infrastructure as a service, and then how that maybe transitions for some customers into using more native cloud services that are probably more defined like platform as a service. And I'm thinking more, the serverless type stuff in the cloud.
Right. No, absolutely. And I would use that term platform in two distinct categories. At a broad stroke, you can see that between SaaS, which is its own platform that you don't have to worry about, cloud native, which is something that's new but enables great innovation, and your legacy platforms, whether you have bare metal, a lot of people still have IBM equipment or are running databases inside of bare metal, or you have a virtual environment, even hyper-converged. We're talking about different platforms that when you have to do those core kinds of infrastructure things, I'll call them disciplines that are important, high availability, disaster recovery, backup, security, those different platforms create new challenges. And that's why one of the reasons when somebody moves, to a hyperscaler, lifts and shifts, and of course, they never get as much over there as they wanted to, they wind up with 2 distinct platforms or 3 because they have, more than one hyperscaler that they have to deal with at a platform level, at that broad stroke level. When you talk about that platform in the second category, which is now I'm looking inside the services that are available to me. Can I have a serverless, environment? What is that like? And by the way, I still have a legacy environment that has a platform as well as to how that functions, typically 3-tier, an old model, but it's still there and it's still working and it's still going to be around for a while. So kind of back to the question of how we help people understand it is to first is take a step back and take a clean look at the applications that you have, how long they're going to be around, how they need to work together, and where they belong, and build out a multi-cloud approach that has a strategy for that broad stroke platform idea that I just raised up here.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a great transition. I mean, you're starting to touch on some of the things that I think we can, make a little transition here and talk. We've really defined what we mean as we talk about cloud and these models and terms we'll continue to use, right? IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, and what that looks like. But you're starting to touch on, some of the challenges, and one of those, being you reduce the complexity of silos. And I think there's this idea that, maybe if I go to cloud, if I just go to cloud, if I just lift and shift and take everything there, right, I've reduced complexity because everything's in the cloud. And I think you started touching on that already, is that, that's not necessarily the case, and that the cloud can help you, but at the same time, if you're not doing it right and you're not thinking about the architecture up front, you can be in a worse case with silos than you were on-prem.
Yeah, it's hard to say what's more, that it's complex, but we run at it, to simplify things, making it more complex, hanging on to it, or that we don't move and we decide, hey, everything's fine the way it is, and we don't give ourselves the opportunities or the potential for innovation that cloud really gives you. I think, again, that in the mix and the challenge and what we see as a real roadblock to having cloud really work well is to step back and look at that general platform, and to get into the detail of that, understand what it's going to take to manage and support that. So not only do you have these different means of management, administration, support, the disciplines like backups and DR, et cetera, but you have them across different platforms. And today, we don't really have the resources to do that. In fact, it's one of the biggest challenges facing pretty much everybody, between, trying to just get the equipment and then having the people that understand it and put it in place, when my landscape is growing in complexity at a rapid pace. The solution to that really is as a service. I mean, when we look at the NIST model and what it's talking about, those features describe what it means to have infrastructure and applications that are much more agile, easy to scale, that will provide exactly what you want in a quote unquote as a service model. Now, that doesn't mean if I trying to move my application to a cloud native, it's all just plug and play. I've got to refactor those things. But the thing about the infrastructure is that's the same too. but it's not as easy as just moving an application and refactoring it to cloud native, and now it's running there. In the infrastructure side of things, I have multiple platforms and I need a strategy for managing multiple platforms. So kind of forgetting about it or pretending that my legacy workloads shifted into the cloud is going to solve problems isn't necessarily the best way. There are other options. And I think you kind of pointed to that before. It's what does it take to really look at this, assess these things, understand them, so that you're making, I would say, decisions that are outside your typical preview. We're used to dealing with things in a certain way, and to get things done properly, and especially in this day and age, and in infrastructure with the complexity of multiple platforms, you want to think differently about it.
Yeah, and I think you brought up, I mean, you bring up several good points there. And I think one thing you talked about is, you talked about the benefits of cloud from the standpoint of, you were, the elasticity, right? The geodispersed, it's just the natural geodispersed of what cloud really is, from the providers that are truly providing cloud and not just calling something cloud for the sake of marketing. So when you get a real cloud, it has those features, right? It has those core features that we talked about with the elasticity, and it's a measured service. And, I think if you could speak to some ways that, and you've probably seen this with customers, how just, when you kind of touched on it with refactor, but maybe dive a little bit more into that, of that lift and shift model, why that lift and shift doesn't really fit. Because if you're not going to use the native services that cloud provide, then it kind of becomes just, a high-end cost for not really taking advantage of what cloud truly gives you.
Right. And anybody who's in the infrastructure business knows that if I'm going to lift and shift into a hyperscale environment, my entire team has to go through a lot of training. Remember, they're supporting something that's been around for a while, and they know like the back of their hand in deep and meaningful ways relative to operations and support and performance and availability. These things are really important. So when I just shift something into the cloud, and we've seen this again and again and again, people are like, I've talked with CIOs who said, I wanted, 3.5 years ago to be 90% of the way in the cloud in 2 years. I made that statement to the board. It's 3.5 years later, and we've stopped the project at 35% because of the challenges that we're having with cost, with complexity, and just with people and skills. So if you're not refactoring the applications to really garner new business value, because the innovation we've kind of talked about, but you got to put on the front page here, is that there's great value in the services that are available in a cloud native environment. There's fantastic value across the board, from the services that enable them to do things with machine learning and AI and database systems that are not available in the traditional structure, to all the elasticity and agility you have for people who need to ramp up and ramp down, et cetera. So those things are great, but realistically, how long is it going to take you to get there? And are you just moving things there? That's not what I'm talking about. And how long? I'm talking about what needs to go there and when. A lot of applications that organizations have are going to survive just fine inside of that platform structure that they have. But to cloudify it, in other words, to have some of the elasticity and the automation and the APIs that you want, and to simplify things for the workforce, et cetera, that's where a VMware cloud platform makes a real big difference. We talk about this a lot when we're talking with our clients, and give them good examples of how we can shift what they're doing to where we're at, and give them that modernization and optimization. And their resources are very familiar with that platform and environment, so they don't have to throw out that tribal wisdom that they have. I'll give you one more simple example. We worked with the University of Phoenix, and there's some great things online on our YouTube channel, et cetera, that talk about this particular project. We went out and met with them when they were already on their AWS journey, but they were having difficulties getting things moved over. They had 12,000 virtual systems they wanted to get out there, but like the other organization I mentioned, they had been stopped. in working with them and some other partners of ours, we created a plan, and in 9.5 months, we moved those 12,000 systems onto our cloud platform. That's record-breaking in some people's minds. They can't even dream of that. And here's the important piece. They're still on their cloud journey with AWS. In other words, those applications that are targets for good refactoring, increasing business value for what they do, are still on that road. But we freed up, I think the number is 234,000 hours over the life of contract. And what do I mean by that? The FTEs they retrained, there were 50 of them, 50. So again, I'm talking about all these moving parts that are happening. If somebody just says, I'm going to lift and shift things into the cloud, and they're not looking at all these components, they don't understand what needs to change or what just needs to be optimized for the platform that it's on, and saving the resources and the wisdom that you have in your team, then there are challenges. A lot of people have those. A lot of people have chosen that and tried that. There are definitely a lot of new bumps and bruises and scars on the backs of people on a cloud journey where lift and shift was the first approach.
Yeah, and something I want to touch on there, Jim. I think you will have direct knowledge in what you guys have done, Expedient, how you've helped companies is there's a challenge, and I think maybe a little bit of fear across some teams that, if I move what we've always done on-prem, what happens to me, right? If I move this infrastructure I've always done on-prem, and maybe even if I'm using someone like an Expedient, a provider that does, that in between that gives me like a VMware cloud and infrastructure as a service offerings that is more as a service than what I do today, even that step, they may feel hesitant because it's, what happens to me, and so if you can probably have some examples, you probably have, maybe University of Phoenix or others where you've seen that benefit the organization from what they're able to help those people do.
Yeah. There's kind of two messages here, and it's pretty important. One is, for the folks that are leading those teams and for the folks that are on those teams, the bottom line is that if you're not making that move and you're allowing yourself as a leader and your team to continue to move forward using the old model of thinking, then you're going to quickly, unquestionably run behind. There's just no doubt. We've all seen what is possible in the cloud again and again. The disruptor that it's simply been in markets is very clear. So it's good for everybody when you make that effort to figure out where you need to go, create, an appropriate strategy. Again, I'm not a silver bullet guy. I'm an infrastructure guy, and we're naturally not silver bullet guys, but we need to be innovators. We need to think about these things in ways of, if you wait too long, you're going to get in trouble. A really good example of that is zero trust. See, people talk about zero trust as if it's something that they can implement. It's not. It's a series of tools and processes that have actually been around for a long time, but the new dashboards and the new tools like microsegmentation, as a part of everything else that we have, from Active Directory to single sign-on to multi-factor to the firewalls, means that there's something there that you want to be working towards. And cloud, to me, is very similar. Yes, you can make a lot of advances in clouds in specific areas. And the biggest advances we see are when organizations focus on a particular application where they're targeting specific business value, and they put together the right people to move that piece of the infrastructure to where it needs to be. Microsegmentation, that journey is no different. So relative to cloud and taking on cloud and people who would be concerned about it, this is exciting stuff. And for some people, they won't change. I've seen and talked to a number of folks who said, there are some people I just couldn't get to come along. And these are leaders who are working to encourage them to take it on. But that encouragement and that effort's worth it, because you'll get people who just need a little nudge, and it's good for them. It's good for their careers, and it's good for the organization.
Yeah, and you touched on something very important. I mean, that how transformational cloud computing across, all these different methods of how it's taken on has been, right? I mean, from SaaS-based applications to IaaS providers to the big hyperscalers and what they're able to do. The benefits are far and wide, and I don't want, so I don't want to seem like all doom and gloom with some of the stuff we're talking about, but how much benefit we can get and how much benefit organizations can get from the cloud, and almost these tool sets that others are developing and others are maturing, that you can just go take use of to so that you can focus more on the business. And I think you think about some of the things that are going on with analytics, right? And the analytics platforms that are being built in these cloud providers, that now instead of having to go build data lakes myself, I can go make use of that, right? I mean, an even more simplistic view is like, instead of having to go worry about, are all my hosts in my data center up to date, I can go worry about how are we strategically deploying systems in our environment because somebody else is taking care of that underlying VMware platform, right? So even in that terms of just a VMware cloud into these, again, the big hyperscalers and what they're doing, I think, just focusing on, there's so much benefit that can come when you do it correctly.
Yeah, the world's really changed. I used to be a database designer for data warehousing, and I did that for folks like Diebold and GE and BP, and I did it for a long time. And I remember at a conference once, giving a talk right after somebody from Informix spoke. That tells my age a little bit. The guy from Informix got up and said, "Build it and they will come." And I got up and said, "Don't do what he just said." In other words, on the application and the innovation side, what should drive it? When we talk about transformation, we talk about transformation in two layers. The transformation of the application layer, which is and always has been innately driven to what it's providing to the business. So when you start combining folks from technology and the innovations that we have with the folks from business and building something that's really going to move them forward competitively, et cetera, in the marketplace, that's great. But the other side of that, which is the part where there's some doom and gloom, is because the infrastructure side has changed drastically. We're trying to do things similarly to how we've done it before. We're using an old model to grow and expand these multiple platforms, and it won't work. You still need an infrastructure mindset, but you've got to expand it beyond just, I'm going to get to hyperscaler. You've got to think about the different platforms. You've got to listen to your application team in the business and understand where they're going and how long it's going to take them to get there. A lot of infrastructure teams are forced to move to the cloud because that came down from the board. It seems like this is important and we should do it. And nobody asked them, hey, what's the right way to do this? But even if they're in that already and struggling from that complexity, the way we approach it and the types of things that we offer and looking at it from this new perspective, where you're trying to leverage these as a service models, just like you're leveraging SaaS on your different platforms, whether it's hyperscale or whether it's the virtual environment or even the on-prem.
Yeah, and that's great. And what is something you said there? I mean, it makes me think about, like, we don't, the SaaS seems to me as an anomaly, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about, like, they don't think about SaaS like they think about other things. And when it comes to SaaS, it's almost like, yeah, you're telling me I don't have to worry about, care and feeding of an Exchange server. So I just go to Office 365, sign me up. But, and that's such a big part of people's environments and has become such a big part. But, it seems like there's hesitation with some of the other stuff, right? And this kind of gets into some of the misconceptions, I think, when we think about cloud is, one of them being, well, this is just an on-prem workload, so I'm just going to run it on-prem. And I'm sure you guys see that time and time again, and it helped people realize that that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, what we see as the biggest road stop for that is that on-prem set of equipment, it's always got new equipment as parts of it. And nobody wants to have just spent money on that and then fade it out, right? That's costly. And you have people that see not only that equipment and the fact that it's running there, but the other services along with it as an integral part of their duties. So when I talk about those disciplines that have to, take place to manage and support and administer those systems, then you have something that's almost hidden. People don't even talk about it. And what we're saying in the as a service is not just for your platform, but for the backups, for the file storage, for the DR, for the security, and having somebody who's in the data center 24/7 to push buttons if you need to. This is the kind of thing that today's IT team needs. Again, to use the analogy of security, you don't want IT team doing security in the traditional way, constructing firewalls and watching the firewalls. You want them to be out in front of that. You want them to be cyber threat intelligence experts, thinking ahead, because the guys who are out there hacking us, we're using old firewalls and they're flying modified drones. You got to get out in front of them. Inside of cloud, it's the same thing. If you want to get ahead of this new wave that's transforming how markets are operating at the IT infrastructure level, you want to start leveraging as a services in as many places as you can, so your IT team can be the experts in creating alignment between these platforms with the organization and being the oversight and governance of how those backups and how that security and how that DR works best for the organization across those platforms. It's a big job.
It is. And you're touching on security, which is very interesting to me, because in my time, I've been in IT for 20 plus years. And so obviously I've been here at the forefront of is the cloud infrastructure. So, a lot of IT used to be, early on in my IT career, is people coming in and saying, no, virtualization is not going to work, right? No. You put my application in a VM, you need to move it back to a physical machine because you're slowing my application down. And now it's, now we're kind of in that transition to cloud, and there's some of the same, like, well, no, I can't just put this in cloud. Or again, some of them are going full on, and, I think it's easier for the people that are born in the cloud to take that on. So there is this idea of, it is easier to step in, just like somebody who started in virtualization is going to have an easier time than someone who started before and having to transition to virtualization. Someone who's starting, when they call it born in the cloud. And to me, the real definition of born in the cloud is we were able to start and build in this, like in these mechanisms, in this platform, right? And take care, use these security models rather than transitioning what we were doing on site. And so I think, if you think about what you're talking about around some of the securities, I mean, maybe even touch on some of the main, a couple of things as you think about security in the cloud, where you're seeing people have to make some major transitions from what they're doing, going on-prem now into that cloud.
Yeah, typically on-prem, especially for organizations that have offices in a lot of different places and or go through acquisitions, even more in what I'm about to say, there's just a myriad of mini silos. They may be attached, and for organizations who did things appropriately, they brought on new acquisitions and pushed down their technology, right? So that they're operating in the same way across those environments. That's great. But just like in managed services, one of the most important things is to have a single pane of glass. In other words, I want to try and reduce all the different places inside of an organization, from the laptops through the databases down to the networks. I want to have a single place where I can go to see my tickets and see my monitoring and my logs. I need to have a single pane of glass that boils up into some good reporting, so I understand what's going on. When it comes to the security side, they're no different. And so when you think about single sign-on, multi-factor, when you talk about protecting the end users, when you talk about the firewalls that need to be in place across those and the microsegmentation, you're talking about things that you now need to think about more broadly. For example, we offer, as part of a VDI solution, a full security suite of all the things that I mentioned around that. And what's beautiful about it is that the microsegmentation works not only for those desktops, but it works for your servers as well. You can imagine the chaos that starts to happen when you're building these things out in components across your security landscape. And there's a lot of tools that are needed for this, and you're not thinking about your platforms and how you're going to manage those or clearly choosing to have a silo sitting over there that's going to be a bit of a boat anchor for a while.
Yeah, and again, again, touching on security, and you said it's like all these considerations you do have. I think one of the things, and I talk about this time and time again with customers, is there's a misconception both ways that cloud is more secure, and then you hear other people say cloud is less secure. And I've heard the argument both ways. And I think, my advice on that is the most important thing you can understand with any cloud provider, be it SaaS, be it the hyperscalers, be it IaaS, is their shared responsibility matrix. And that should be one of the first things you look for with any type of, no matter what model you're using, no matter what type of service as a service offering you're using to start your cloud journey or advance your cloud journey, you need to understand their shared responsibility matrix. So where their responsibility ends and where your responsibility begins on that security and data protection landscape.
Yeah, and an important piece of that is microsegmentation, because I've heard people literally say, "Hey, I'm much safer in the cloud," and I can tell you that because of what it takes me just to get connected to my cloud. Okay, I don't disagree with that in some respects, but the challenge is that what's behind there, once they've broken in, is still an open door. The idea of microsegmentation is to limit the blast radius. And granted, it's not simple to put in place, but it's not that hard today. Virtualization came about in 2003, although it was around for a long time, when VMware created an interface that people could use, administrators could easily use, scale, and adjust what they're doing. Microsegmentation is the same way. We have new tools now that give you a pane of glass where you can manage the complexity of zero trust, which NIST will tell you has been around for a long time, and it has. But once you have a tool that helps you manage that, then you want to get on that road. You want to get on that path and start figuring out how to do it. You don't have to jump in with both feet, but you got to get your toes in the water. You got to start figuring out how to manage those things. Because again, once somebody finds a way to get through what you think is the perfect solution, and the behind the scenes, you're a wide open book, people are there. The statistics on ransomware is that they're in the system 6 to 9 months before they're noticed. Do you think it takes much for them to figure out how to lock down all your data when they're there for 6 to 9 months? No, it doesn't. So there's a lot to it, and yet the tools are here. So I go back to what I'm saying about, if you're not thinking about these things and beginning to take these on, you're just getting further and further into an area where you're almost unquestionably going to be in trouble, whether it's your cloud journey or your security journey.
Yeah, that's a great point. One more thing I want to touch on from the misconception side, but also use this point to transition and, kind of our final area of architecture and planning is cost, right? And I don't want to say it's a misconception, it's just talked about. And I think it can be, depending on how you're going about things, but it's, cloud is cost effective, cloud is expensive. And the answer is yes to both, right? But I think that comes from, when you're doing things and not architecting and optimizing correctly to go to the cloud. So, with that kind of, with the misconception, and I guess talking a little bit about cost, I think that can transition into some of, what we see and what you guys see as you help customers, from architecture, optimization, and move to maybe avoid some of those costs. You talk about that in starting that planning phase.
Yeah. What we see oftentimes is that the legacy systems are the boat anchor, but they're the hidden boat anchor. So Google did a study and Forbes published it, where they compared people born in the cloud to people that what I like to call have the long tail of the dragon. Legacy systems that have been around for a long time, they're 1.6 times less efficient than their counterparts born solely in the cloud. That's a lot. That means for 100 people, there are like 37 people that are working just to manage that complexity that I've been talking about almost from the beginning of this, right? So how do you manage that? Well, you flip it around. Instead of having a journey that starts out with trying to push everything out there, you optimize and modernize your legacy platform first. And I don't mean that you don't do your applications that are targeting business value. Those things happen in tandem, but you have to remember, like I said, it gets pushed down from the top, infrastructure, move everything to the cloud. There's still almost always application refactoring going on for targeted business value. That still happens. But when you go down and attack the lift and shift model, you're missing out. You've got to think about where to put them, how to get that stuff off your IT team's plate. Because I've been saying they need to have a growth mindset. They need to be looking at these things. I think I've given a lot of really good examples of why it's so important to just push them in the direction of that learning, give them the training and the tools that they need. So as a great example, and I'm going to use University of Phoenix again because it's out there on the internet, so I can talk about it freely. We saved them $26 million and we moved them in 9 months. So that's, again, for 12,000 systems, I think most people would agree who've done this or have been working on it. And I've talked to people who've done equally great things. Don't get me wrong. I've done a lot of interviews with CIOs and others in the industry. And I'm not saying we're the only one, but I'm going to say clearly the majority of the time people get over their skis. And it's because they're just trying to move things over. That's not the best way to do it. There's ways to place those legacy workloads in an arena that optimizes, modernizes them quickly, gives you more tools and resources so that your team's not re-procuring things, trying to figure out the security aspects, the backup aspects, so on and so forth. We're giving them a great head start so that they can work in a new way in the traditional environment and train themselves to work powerfully in the future environment.
Yeah, and you know, one of those things there, I think, you know, when that knee-jerk reaction to move, one of the conversations I have a lot with customers is, and you kind of touched on this, start with the application. Whenever you're thinking about your cloud journey, you have to think about the application first, because you have to decide, like, you know, am I going to refactor this? Am I going to replace this? Right? Am I just going to, you know, retain this as it is and then retire it later? And starting with a plan around that, it's obviously going to help your architecture and your design, because you're going to understand, okay, this may be going to SaaS, this may be staying put, and this may be going to more hyperscaler native services. But the other thing to me that's really important for as you begin to move things, because we all hear, and this kind of ties back to cost a little bit, everybody I think nowadays has heard about egress charges, right? When you go into the hyperscalers, that charge you with that, and they want to land you there and keep you there. I think that was something that nobody knew about in the beginning. Now everybody knows about it, right? Everybody talks about egress charges. Understanding applications and how your applications talk to each other on-prem, so that when you do start moving things, you don't end up with a database talking back to a database on-prem that you weren't aware of, because, you know, things have just sprawled a little bit on-prem, and now, you know, mapping those applications out, I think is a big benefit to starting that design.
Yeah, I agree. I want to toss into this the concept of the difference between small and commercial businesses too, and large size, because, you know, for SMBs and some commercial, you know, if you're a Microsoft shop, shifting to Azure, not a bad idea. And I've seen it work very effectively many times, right? But if you're commercial with a lot of legacy systems, you're not fully Azure, or you're not ready to commit to Azure, then there are other ways to seamlessly move those workloads. And so I want to reiterate that when you get into those larger environments, there are two ways you can look at it. One is, as you just described, make sure you understand the applications, the lay of the land, what's going where over time. And that's very important for the second part, which is the infrastructure side. A good example of this for upper commercial and enterprise businesses is a lot of people wound up with a good amount of their stuff in the cloud, and their data center, which they own, is now half full, you know, or sometimes less. And so to me, this thing I'm saying about these two ways of doing this shift, this data center is an example. if you don't have a data center yourself, or you're just, on-prem in somebody else's, there's still a powerful way to move those virtual workloads into the cloud. But I think this is a good example of why I'm saying it's important to go. If you want to get out from under having all those systems, procuring them, keeping up the systems, racking them, doing all the things you have to do to take care of them, then moving to a VMware platform is very easy. On the data center side, we do something called data center buybacks. And this is really big. This is where somebody's decided, hey, I want to get out of this. And that's great, because we can not only write them a check for the data center, but they can leave their stuff there, right there in the data center. Now they're right next to our cloud and our network. So their backbone is tightly attached to the hyperscalers. And they save oodles of money on, again, right out of the gate, just on the management operations, but the fact that we bought the data center from them. So it's a real win for IT folks if they're, hanging on to a data center and they know it's time to get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great point too, right? On the connectivity piece, which I don't think we talked a little bit about with egress charges, but thinking about that connectivity, how am I going to get into the cloud? Where am I going to get into the cloud from? I mean, I think as we talk about what are some of the foundations of my cloud journey are, how am I going to handle my applications? How am I going to handle my security? And how I'm going to handle my connectivity. If I could pick only 3 things, to me, that would be the foundation you build on, because everything else is like, eventually is like redoing the kitchen, right? I can move a wall, I can tear this down, I can move that around, but I don't want to have to change the foundation of my house. And I think those 3 are probably some of the key foundations of a cloud journey.
Yeah, and it goes back to the timing again, because so many think I'm just going to move into the cloud and I won't have egress fees. Smaller environments, that's easy to do. Larger environments, it never happens. And the egress fees come up and they wind up having to bring back things that were put up there. We've seen people repatriate entire data centers because they moved out of them and found out that the costs were well above what was reasonable by any stretch.
Yeah. But we're getting close to time. If anybody has any questions they want to throw in here at the end, but while you're thinking about that, I'll let Jim, if there's, so Jim, again, appreciate you joining us today to talk through this. I've really enjoyed the conversation. If there were 3 things you could leave everyone here today with that you would want them to get out of this or think about in their cloud journey, and, I give you the floor to, those 3 things that you would want them to take away.
Yeah, it's definitely to really have your eye on the ball, and the eye is innovation, unquestionably. There's so much to take advantage of by optimizing and modernizing your landscape. So the 2 parts of that target are the application and the infrastructure. So for my points 2 and 3, application, it's a known, you're going to do that. SaaS is a good way to go if your organization can really leverage those kinds of tools in specific arenas. Salesforce.com is a great example. But on the infrastructure side, and this is the biggest point, again, infrastructure people are a low man on the totem pole. They're that thing that we have to do and spend money. And it's why so many people stay frozen inside of their existing infrastructure, because they're really relying on the people that have built that to be the advisors for where they should go next. But the advice they're going to give them is to stay where they are. And that's not going to serve the organization. So make sure you're working with somebody who can help you assess, are you placing your workloads in a place where you can really get optimization and modernization that's going to help you out right now. When we can move folks from where they're at to a platform and save them money at the same time, that's different than what you said about, and I agree with, it's going to cost money to go to hyperscale. That's taking on a whole new platform and requires some things. Hopefully, the business value generated out of the innovation that you're getting would make up for that. It absolutely should. But when it comes to the infrastructure, there's simple things that we can do to have conversations to give you some preview to what that looks like, or even drive down into some assessments and quickly give you the hard data that shows where all this is possible.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Jim. From my end, I will leave from, and this is more from, maybe a little bit deeper engineering technical aspect is I would tell people, think about those applications, get it mapped out, get it assessed, understand your applications, understand your current environment from, are you oversized? But there's a good chance you are. If you've run everything on-prem and you're trying to make that move to the cloud, you probably put too much memory in a server, too much CPU. These are deep technical things, but that costs money when you start moving to as a service models. If that's what you're doing, if you're moving infrastructure rather than going to a SaaS-based model, when you move those, and if they're oversized, it's going to cost you. So have that right size. And then again, make sure you're focusing on the foundations, those things we missed. Especially security and connectivity, because those are harder to change once you start building your building. So those would be, for me, a little bit more technical aspects, but 3 things I think I always, focus on in conversations. So Q&A is clear. So I guess nobody has any burning questions, or we're able to answer them throughout the session. Jim, I thank you again for being here.
My pleasure.
And if anybody, again, if you're facing these struggles, you're wondering, part 2 of our webinar is going to be at the end of September. So that's coming up on September 28th. So if you haven't, you can register for that one and show up for that one. And that's going to talk more about, now that we've designed and thought about designing our cloud and the day 0 stuff, getting into actually migrating and operating day 1 and day 2 of the cloud journey, and some notes and thoughts there, and specifically around some of that security and optimization and automation space. So look forward to having everybody back for that. Again, thanks everyone for joining us today. If there's anything we can help you with, reach out to Opkalla. We're glad to bring wonderful providers like Expedient and Jim here to you to help you solve your IT problems and help you on your path to the right solution. So thanks again, Jim. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day. Yep. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Goodbye.